How's gambling?
Good.
You went gambling?
I went to Vegas.
Oh, right, you were in Vegas, of course.
No, I finished in 79th place.
Ooh.
1,300 people in one of the tournaments.
Did you have any amazing sushi in Vegas?
I had mediocre sushi in Vegas.
Hello, and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. My name is Jody Avirgan. President Trump is meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at a summit in Singapore. It's a heck of a development. This is a real big moment, and we're going to talk about the strategy that got us to this point and then kind of how to think about the various possible outcomes. And while we're on the topic of international relations, Trump, as you likely know, is heading into these negotiations coming off a G7 summit that found him sparring with a few of our trustiest allies. So it's a very interesting moment for international diplomacy, and here to discuss it all is Editor-in-Chief Nate Silver. Hello, Nate.
Hello, Jody.
Welcome back from Vegas.
Thank you.
Senior politics writer Claire Malone. Hello, Claire.
Hey, Jody.
And here to talk about North Korea and Trump-style diplomacy is 538 senior writer Ollie Rader. Hello, Ollie. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Jody. Thanks.
We're also later in the show going to talk about the primaries that are happening this Tuesday. Micah Cohen will be back to talk about that, and we're going to look at this electoral experiment in Maine where they're using ranked choice voting for the first time. And then there's a Senate race in Nevada. I guess we can have that conversation too, that we have our eye on. But let's talk about North Korea. I will add the disclaimer that we are recording this at around noon on Monday. The summit is about 8 hours away. But Ollie, your background is in economics, and you've been writing it. People have been reading on the site, and you did it on this podcast as well with Nate, kind of seeing this through a game theory lens. So bring us up to speed through that lens. How did we get to this moment right now in these negotiations?
Yeah, Summit Day. I'm very excited. The U.S. did not make the World Cup, but we can exercise our jingoism through international diplomacy. So we're kind of entering a second game in game theory parlance. So for the last couple of years, North Korea has dramatically accelerated its nuclearization process. It has intercontinental ballistic missiles, it has hydrogen bombs, and it can reach the mainland of the United States. And this was one type of game which was something like a game of chicken. It's Trump and Kim sort of racing toward each other and kind of bidding in the currency of nuclear risk. And I argued that Trump sort of was very successful in playing this game, and certain things about his personality and policies helped him be successful. So in this type of game, having a reputation as sort of a wild, unpredictable player can actually benefit you. And it got Trump and Kim to the table later tonight. I think in this second stage, those exact same qualities will make it much more difficult to come to a beneficial agreement. You know, there's no... And this is a classic case of bargaining, a bargaining game. And in international relations, there's an idea called anarchy, meaning that there's no international super government that can enforce any agreement that is made in Singapore. It's up to the parties themselves to enforce and uphold the agreement. And we've seen at the G7 in Canada and the Paris Accord, Iran nuclear deal, these are all things that Trump has kind of blown up, and that will be a risk, I think, with whatever, if anything, comes out of Singapore.
Ollie, can you clarify for people when you're talking about the game theory within the actual negotiations themselves, what aspects are you thinking about or what experts are thinking about? Because I think some people will listen to this and say, but it's a negotiation. How is it game theory? They're trying to agree on subtle terms. So what are the sort of specifics within the negotiations that you're talking about?
I think that's a great question. So I think each side has, something that they want, and the game is sort of extracting the most from your opponent, in scare quotes, and giving up as little as possible, and kind of that's the game. And what are the pieces in this game? I mean, the U.S. wants North Korea to denuclearize permanently and provably, and North Korea wants security guarantees, the end of sanctions, some sort of meaningful relationship with the U.S. And I think the sense in which this is a game is, I think you've seen some gamesmanship, right? Canceling the meeting, making the meeting back on, just sort of the statements and posturing is sort of a move in this game, a signal to the other party of how how willing you're going to be to concede things or to demand things.
In terms of what comes next, how will you go about gauging whatever an outcome is? And is your sense that we're going to have a tangible outcome to evaluate right away? Or is it, what's the time horizon here?
I don't have a super specific answer. I wouldn't expect much.
Are these half-hour episodes or hour-long
yeah, exactly.
cable dramas?
Well, I think it'll be a mini-series. So recently, I think just this morning, it was reported that this first meeting has been cut down from a full day to half a day, and some people are suggesting that Kim just wants to get his picture taken with the president and go back home and splash that over North Korean state media. So I think that's kind of the baseline, and anything beyond that, I know that diplomats have been crafting the joint statement that's going to come out after the meeting, so it'll be interesting to read that and to read how the U.S. press covers it and the North Korean press covers it. Press, again, in scare quotes.
Literally, scare quotes.
Yeah.
But this notion of unpredictability, I would imagine coming out of a meeting like this, the air of unpredictability means that you can maybe hold on to less, or tell me if you think this is right, that you can hold on to less than you would, say, in a more traditional summit that had the sort of traditional trappings of diplomacy.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, it will be important to take whatever Trump says after the meeting with a grain of salt. But, I mean, given that, it's a difficult position to negotiate in when you can't sort of be taken seriously.
Claire, Nate, we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, but do you have any sense, or what are you looking for in terms of how this is going to play domestically? Are there particular tea leaves you want to read coming out of this meeting?
I think the international response is more interesting because Trump has sort of delegitimized a number of international agreements. And if you're the North Koreans and you're sort of sitting there looking at that, the photo op sort of thing makes a lot of sense to me, which if you're going back to what will the domestic response in the U.S. be to this? Well, it could be huge embarrassment for Trump if it is just a photo op and Un says like, well, I'm going to go home now. This was a nice half day of work and that's fine. So I think it's a gamble for Trump. Again, you can't say, it ain't over till the fat lady sings, but like this is a huge political risk in some ways on the thing that he's gotten the most kudos for.
I think unless it's on like an extreme end of the range and on the direction, that maybe the substance of it doesn't matter as much. And extreme means if there's some type of actual agreement by North Korea to denuclearize on the one hand, or on the other hand, if it totally blows up and literally there are threats to nuke one another. Neither of things is like totally beyond the pale in terms of possibility. But beyond that, I would probably say not be an expert in North Korea or international diplomacy, but to me as an observer of domestic politics, it seems like the act of having the meeting is what's important. It's saying we're trying to resolve this through a framework of negotiation and not threats. It's saying that North Korea has enough standing as a legitimate regime to meet with the president of the United States and have this be treated quite seriously. It's an example, in some ways, one could argue, of Trump being constrained by some type of norms of domestic politics and international politics where, I think he'll be under pressure. I don't know what he thinks, right? I would think that if you did have the situation where it blew up and he was embarrassed and then resorted back to threatening to nuke North Korea or vice versa, that would be not good for him politically. And I think he knows that. I want to rescind that. I have no idea if he knows it, but I think it would be risky enough that like it puts some pressure on him to have at least an outcome that looks good from a PR standpoint. But again, where I guess differ from people, maybe we're jumping ahead to the next question though, is like, I see people, liberal commentators being like, oh, this is just going to kind of let Trump be way too gracious toward Kim and blah, 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 right? And too conciliatory. I don't know. A lot of the policy that the Obama administration pursued was on the realm toward, I don't know if you want to call it containment or engagement or whatever else, right? So some of the kind of hot takes seem like people presume that this must be bad because it's Trump. But you show up, you have a ceremony, you're signaling that we're moving back from the brink. There's nothing that enforceable to Ali's point. I'm not sure that's like a bad outcome. You start negotiating at the very highest level, and so if things fall apart, it's harder to have a fallback plan, right? Like that's the whole risk of this thing is that
it's in some ways from a typical diplomatic point of view, this is the only shot. These are the top two guys, and like this is the one chance to make it happen.
Maybe, but with Trump, one can argue that everything is so kind of provisional that like it makes it matter less, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Well, and Trump has said that he's open to Kim coming to the U.S. So even though these are the top two guys, it could be the first in a mini series. So even if it's a big, I hate this word, but nothing burger comes out of this meeting.
So you bookend it with the top guys kick it off, the grunts do the actual work, and then the top guys.
Yeah, maybe they hit it off and become buddies and meet, monthly.
It is just interesting that it is real, as you were saying, that it's the main guys meeting first, and then that'll set the tone. Okay, Ollie, while we have you here, let's talk about the G7 summit in Canada this weekend, which sort of set the table for all this. But first, let me tell you that this week's podcast is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. If you ever shower or brush your teeth or try to make your hair look presentable, well, there is good news for you, and you should be doing one or two, or all three of those things. Well, the good news is Dollar Shave Club has a lot more stuff to help you out. Dollar Shave Club delivers everything you need to look, feel, and smell your best. Dollar Shave Club, yes, that Dollar Shave Club delivers everything you need, from shampoo to conditioner to body wash, toothpaste, hair gel, even a wipe that will leave your tush feeling tingly clean. Those are just words that I'm going to read. Check out their amber and lavender calming body cleanser. It smells incredible. You will be hard pressed to find a product that great at a store. All of Dollar Shave Club's products are made with top shelf ingredients that won't break your budget. You will feel the difference. Plus, shipping is included with your membership. Here's a great way to try a bunch of Dollar Shave Club's products. For just $5, you can get their daily essentials starter set. It comes with body cleanser, One Wipe Charlie's, their amazing butt wipes, their world famous shave butter, and their best razor, the 6-blade executive razor. Keep the blades coming for a few bucks more a month. Add in shampoo, toothpaste, or anything else you need for the bathroom. Check it all out at dollarshaveclub.com/politics. Once again, for all your bathroom needs, that's dollarshaveclub.com/politics. All right, let's do a little bit on the G7 summit. So just to set the scene, according to reports from inside the talks, which were held this past weekend, things were heated at times. The leaders at the G7 did eventually agree on a communique about their joint goals. Did I say that right? Communique? I actually tried to find a different word to use, and I couldn't find one. It's a communique. That's what it is. So they did agree on a communique about their joint goals. After leaving the summit, Trump apparently saw Canadian PM Justin Trudeau make comments that he didn't like, and then he announced on Twitter that the U.S. wouldn't sign the communique and called Trudeau, quote, dishonest and weak. Anyone want to take a crack at what's going on here? Nate?
A capricious leader shoots
This isn't
off
the
his mouth.
category where it's batshit insane, I think is the proper phrase to use. I mean, like, we're really getting into a fight with Canada? Really? It's like, it's a little too on the nose for like a parody. And some of the tweets he was sending last night with like, anyway, I guess now the spin is that like, oh, this is meant to show he can take a tough line in negotiations, and maybe his base likes it. Canada's a pretty popular country. And this is the kind of dumbass thing that I think if you're basically, I'm just on the lookout for like any hot take saying this is like brilliant diplomacy or whatever.
Have you seen it yet?
Not yet.
Other than from
I think
John
it's
Bolton.
apart from John Bolton. I mean, they're also kind of lying about like the way Trudeau is characterizing the summit, and Trudeau was quite diplomatic, and Canada's been like a little snarky at times in responding to the response to it, right? But you have a lot of Trump spokespeople going out and like just lying about one of our oldest neighbors and allies, Canada. And I don't know. There's this whole meta debate about like, there's another article about like, oh, Trump's lack of preparation. This is a New York Times piece. Trump's lack of preparation for the North Korea summit actually, betrays a whole lifetime of preparation because he likes to negotiate stuff, right? It's like, don't explain idiocy by claiming that there's some profound strategy behind it.
Well, the Atlantic this morning quotes a senior White House official as saying, and I'm quoting here, "We're America, bitch." So I think, if that is the doctrine.
I recall that being said at like rugby parties in college.
Yeah.
So
that was the rugby doctrine, and now we have the Trump doctrine. But so is that doctrine the way that all of these developments sort of fit into a worldview, or is it really just capricious reaction to whatever happened in the last 24 hours?
Well, I think one game theoretic explanation for this is... Sorry.
One trick pony.
That's hey, you invited me. Is that Trump views every strategic interaction that he has as a zero-sum game, in the sense that there will be a winner and there will be, by definition, a loser, and sort of neglects the many sort of mutually beneficial relationships that exist in human affairs.
Are you saying he's temperamentally ill-suited for diplomacy?
And
that perhaps his alpha dog obsession, he's threatened by, say, a younger world leader who is uniformly liked by the world. I actually think that that's a big part of what this thing with Canada is that Trump has like this weird thing with Trudeau, and there is kind of like, he sees a lot of these negotiations as pure interpersonal things and not as he is the face of the United States. Ali, you made a face at that.
I did not mean to. That was my thinking face. Well, and I'm curious what, Nate and Claire, you guys make of sort of how this will affect the North Korea summit, what happened at the G7. I've sort of heard two schools of thought. One is that this is going to help Kim in the negotiations because Trump screwed up the G7 so badly and he doesn't want to go 0 for 2 on his international trip. And I've heard that Trump was being, scare quotes for a third time, strong and sending a signal to Kim that, you know, he's coming in ready to rumble. I'm not sure I buy either of those completely.
Well, to extend the sports metaphor, like, he is kind of coming in off his game, right? Like, he is probably a little bit angry, and if Trump takes an extremely personal approach to diplomacy, as he said in the news, he hasn't really prepared. He kind of makes, he said, he literally had a quote where he said, "I'll know if he's serious within the first minute." I mean, a lot of that is projection and depends on the person's own frame of mind. So if he's in a foul mood after the G7, I can't believe I'm putting it this way, but like, maybe that threatens the way that the North Korea talks go.
But isn't that exactly Trump's game?
What does that mean?
That he goes in and he's an alpha and he negotiates one-on-one and he doesn't care about the usual trappings of diplomacy.
Sure,
and
but
niceties.
that can work either way, right?
Sure.
That assumes that strategy always works well for Trump, so it could also work poorly.
Right, but I just don't know if this is necessarily a break or he's off his game or whatever. This may just be totally in line with the way that...
Yeah, but I think like Trump's purported strategy is always, I'm going to throw them off their game,
right?
Assuming I'm in control. But if he's actually thrown off his game and goes in there with a sort of whacked out headset, I mean, also this is sports psychology for international diplomacy, but it actually seems to matter now.
I mean, one could argue, maybe it's a mildly hot take, that Kim is the more important of the two players at the summit, and that if he wants to pull some type of surprise and to gain his own domestic popularity, then that's where you would wonder more about Trump. I mean, one thing people don't talk about much is, like, this is also a big time zone switch. No, I mean, like, so performance in a high-pressure situation is going to be affected by an almost 12-hour time zone switch when you, maximum possible time zone switch, when you come over, like, only a day and a half in advance or something.
I'm sure he's sleeping in his oxygen tent.
Well, yeah, but Trump's not like LeBron James in some hyperbaric or whatever, hyperbolic chamber, you know.
He's in a hyperbolic chamber for sure.
Baric, whatever it is. He's not even, frankly, a Hillary Clinton or someone where she's used to this international travel as much, or an Obama where someone's a little bit younger.
He says he only needs 4 hours of sleep a night, right?
But I don't know. I mean, if Kim just wants the photo op, then again, maybe the substance of it doesn't matter that much, and it is what kind of the diplomats are working out behind the scene, right? If Kim wants to, like, turn the screws and embarrass Trump, I mean, then it's a very volatile situation, right?
The G7, however this North Korea diplomatic moment goes down, Claire, is there anything in this run of news that will have material effect on Trump supporters domestically? Is there an outcome here, one way or another, that would shift some of these reluctant Trumpers that we've talked about off the fence one way or another, or is this just theater? I
think the G7 stuff is really, if you're a classic Republican and Trump has just decimated, trade ties with Canada and the EU, that to me is the big thing that can shift. Because in some ways, like, I think everyone's a little bit sort of floating in new territory with the North Korea stuff, but with the economic ties, that's like a real kind of, international embarrassment. Perhaps, the economy is doing well now, but also if you're a Republican who's thinking about trade deals, let's say you own a small business and you're importing lug nuts from Norway, which I'm sure they don't make, but whatever, and then you're thinking, well, I'm up creek in a leaky canoe 5 years from now because I'm going to not be able to buy those lug nuts, whatever it is. I don't know, Ellie, you're the economist here. But like, I think that those people who are traditional Republicans, that to me, of all the things that have happened in the news lately, that's the most sort of risky for people who are thinking with that mindset when they go to the ballot box.
Mm-hmm. There is sort of a narrative hashtag.
I think it's hashtag narrative.
Like
hashtag.
Narrative.
It's Spanish, which is you put it at the end.
So I think Boris Johnson had some tape where he was leaked, although I think Boris Johnson leaked it himself, where he was making comments about Trump and kind of, Boris Johnson said, well, I think there's a bit of method to his madness after all, or whatever, right? And the toughness, I think there's a little bit of that perception among kind of U.S. political journalists and pundits, and kind of even we, I think, have said sometimes, hey, look, at the end of the day, maybe things are actually moving back from the brink with North Korea, and the economy is doing pretty well, and kind of nothing is blown up. And so maybe there is some method to Trump's madness. I think that perception helps Trump at the margin with the way certain voters view him, and his approval ratings are up relative to where they were 3 or 6 months ago, and certainly in the way that other Republicans talk about him and the way that press coverage is framed. So I do think if we kind of get back into a period where it feels like everything is just kind of chaos all the time, I do think that hurts Trump. I think that might be the difference between a 38% approval rating and a 41% approval rating, which you can debate, is that really important in the long run or not? I'm not sure. It's probably important for the midterms, though. But I do think the kind of perception that he is more bluff and bluster than actual bark, and he doesn't actually screw up the major things, right? I think that's a tenuous perception that could be unraveled by a poor week of international diplomacy.
I think the method to his madness, it's not necessarily true and not necessarily false, and I think it's important not to conflate, for example, his handling of North Korea, which I think has been remarkably successful so far, and his handling of trade, which I don't think you could find a single economist who would argue that makes any sense.
I mean, this is just a blanket statement, but we operate within this podcast and a lot of times within our short-term articles within the realm of what is its effect on domestic politics, what are its short-term effects. These are two situations where I find sometimes our way of discussing it, which is important, but it doesn't give the full picture, which is these are two things that have incredibly long-term lasting effects, potentially and likely. And so it kind of, how people react to it in the short term, it matters, but it also is, there's something over the rainbow or over the other side of the mountain, whatever it is, where this isn't just a thing of the now.
Do you think, Claire, that I think you make a great point, that any of that is mitigated by our close allies thinking that this nightmare is going to end in a few years and things will return to the status quo?
I don't know. I mean, if I were Merkel, I would say that I'm probably planning on the worst case scenario, which for her is Trump getting reelected again. And I don't think if you're a world leader that you plan for the best case scenario. You plan for the worst case scenario where the U.S. is basically isolated for 8 years, which does quite a bit to weaken a country's. I mean, countries rise and fall in that much time. I don't know. I mean, I think it does have those sort of lasting effects with those world leaders about how they perceive agreements that they make. Because it's also, the U.S. could elect a Democrat who, let's say, adheres to the Iran agreement and, comes back to all the sort of environmental agreements that we've made. But then 4 years after that, a Trumpian Republican could come back and break the agreements again. So actually, a lot of people have said the U.S. actually has a long-term way of not joining into these international treaties, and Trump is just sort of bringing it to a head.
All right, let's leave it there and move on. Claire, I did not find any evidence of Norwegian lug nut import business, although I did notice that the import of lug nuts is over $1 billion industry, and our top importer is Taiwan, and the state that the most Taiwanese lug nuts go to is? Ohio.
Well, this is that's the reason why I said lug nuts, because it's a joke in my family that every Ohio millionaire has made their fortune on lug nuts, because it's always something where it's really
but
specific.
Not Norwegian. Taiwanese.
It's this really specific industrial part kind of thing that you make your money on.
And the majority of our exported lug nuts go from California to Canada. So there you go. Oliver Rader, thank you very much for joining us. And you will be covering this on the site so people can continue to read your work there.
Thanks for having me. I have learned a lot in the last 45 seconds.
Lug nuts for life.
Up next, we're going to talk about the primaries we are watching tomorrow, including a whole new way of voting in the great state of Maine. But first, let me tell you that this week's podcast is brought to you by Blue Bottle Coffee. Nothing gets your morning quite going like that first cup of coffee. But it can't just be any cup of coffee. It has to be delicious, flavorful coffee that will change the way you look at coffee forever. Well, that coffee is Blue Bottle, which is roasted and shipped to your home within 48 hours of placing your order so that the beans arrive at peak freshness. One sip of Blue Bottle Coffee will make you realize that you have been drinking subpar coffee your entire life. But this is one of those moments. The roads are diverging. You're going to go down the path of drinking great coffee for the rest of your life. There is coffee, and then there is Blue Bottle coffee. What's the difference? Well, for starters, Blue Bottle has an insane dedication to their coffee. They search the planet far and wide to secure exclusive relationships with independent growers all over the world, and they get only the most delicious and sustainable coffee there is. If you're worried about flavor, if you're trying to figure out what's the best coffee for me, well, go and take Blue Bottle Coffee's match quiz to find the perfect coffee. From blends to espressos to single origins, Blue Bottle Coffee has it all. Hurry to bluebottlecoffee.com/politics for $10 off your first subscription order. $10 off at bluebottlecoffee.com/politics. One more time, bluebottlecoffee.com/politics. We're back, and with us, our politics editor, Micah Cohen. Hello, Micah.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You were sitting in the control room listening to that conversation.
It feels very weird. It's like, imagine filling in halfway through on a date or something. It feels like
Oh,
You're coming off the bench.
tell us the truth.
exactly.
How
You're
much
the Andre Iguodala.
did you
take
talk
that.
in the control room?
I didn't talk any shit. I was doing some work in there and listening to the fine analysis you guys were
Thanks,
doing.
Micah.
All right, so tomorrow on Tuesday, we have another big round of primaries. For the record, they are in Maine, Nevada,
Yes.
North Dakota,
No,
South
it's Dakota.
South Carolina, and Virginia. But we are going to zoom in on a couple of those because we find them particularly interesting. Maine and the electoral reforms going on there, and then the Nevada Senate race. So actually in 2016 on this podcast, we talked about a ballot measure in Maine that would lead to electoral reform there. Micah, do you want to take a crack at explaining how Maine has changed the way that the state votes?
Yeah, so they moved to what's called ranked choice voting, or sometimes called instant runoff voting. And basically, instead of just voting for one person, everyone there votes for multiple candidates, ranking them. So, for example, were I to rank people on this podcast, instead of just saying, oh, Micah is the best person on this podcast, I would say Micah's number 1, Claire's number 2, Jody's number 3, Nate's number 4.
F you,
And so
dude.
just to be very clear, 1 is best and 4, in that scenario, 4 is worse. Okay, and
if I were to
Nate was
go-
at 4.
Nate is at 4.
If I were to go Nate number 1, Claire number 2, Jody number 3, Micah number 4, even though Claire has gotten no first place vote, I think Claire would actually win the runoff.
And why is that, Micah?
So what they do is, if no one wins a majority of first place votes, so in this case, no one has, right? I think I've gotten one first place vote.
And Nate did.
Nate
Yeah.
did, right?
Okay.
Then they eliminate the person who got the fewest votes and take that person's voters and apportion them by their second choices. So
Wait, so
we can't use our example anymore.
Yeah, we
There's
can't.
not
But they
enough.
lop off the person who got the fewest first place votes.
Yeah.
Correct.
They apportion that
Right.
person's voters by their second
Yes,
choice
exactly.
preferences.
Right.
So if my first place was eliminated in the first round, then my second choice, Claire, would get my vote.
Yeah. So, we did a whole thing on the pros and cons of this, but does anyone want to jump in on what the basic arguments for and against are? Nate, how do people view this?
I mean, the basic argument for is that you can have situations in multi-candidate races where you have one candidate who's very polarizing and might have the largest plurality of votes, but it's not the most broadly acceptable candidate. So, if they'd had ranked choice voting in the 2016 Republican primary, then arguably underscore.
Yeah, arguably. Yeah,
Debatably.
I would argue.
One might argue that Donald Trump would not have won because the more universally acceptable choices like our friend Marco Rubio, who I think still
Oh, my God.
I think still has a chance to come back.
Yeah.
I'll remind you, he won
Okay.
both the D.C. and the Puerto Rico primary and the Minnesota caucus.
To Nate's point, not that Rubio point, let's ignore that. Hopefully Galen will cut that out. It's not a coincidence that this is happening in Maine.
Yeah.
Right? Maine's current governor, Paul LePage, was elected twice with less than a majority. And I think actually 4 of Maine's last 9 gubernatorial elections, the winner won with less than 40% of the vote.
9 of the last 11 Maine governors is what I have in my
9 of the last 11, they won without a majority.
Without a majority.
But
Sorry.
4 of the last 9 have been without even 40%.
Oh, without even
vote.
40%.
So, Maine has this independent streak. Independent candidates do well there. But the flip side of that is you have these, plurality winners.
Yeah. It's interesting. One, your explanation, Micah, of the ranked choice voting was very good. It also gave me a flashback to my freshman year political science class when I remember the professor explaining it and my teenage brain being like, wait, what? I couldn't grasp it, which, by the way, I think is something that's happening with some Maine voters and Maine's Republican
Well, we
Party.
should get into that.
But I do think just writ large, these couple of, California moved to this top 2 vote getter system in 2012, and then you have this voting change in Maine, which is under some dispute. But what I think is interesting is that these 2 policies, and in general, states thinking about how do we change the way we vote, their broader aim is to change kind of the democratic process in the sense of to make it less partisan. That is kind of the point, is that these 2 systems are meant to appeal. They're like, we don't want you to appeal to just your hardcore partisan base.
Yeah.
These are supposed to be, in the ideal scenario, things that round out our sort of sharp partisan edges right now, which is, maybe it's not going to work. But I do think that's interesting that there are places that are trying to solve what is a problem in the U.S. political system. Well, not in California. Everyone hates the system in California.
The thing, I'm very conflicted about this. So I spent the weekend kind of going through research on ranked choice voting. And the first thing I should say is in the international context, there are countries that use this. But in the U.S., there have been some cities. Maine is the first to use for statewide elections.
But Portland had it in Maine.
San Francisco, I think Minneapolis, I think used it. Some cities in Minnesota. But the research on this is sort of frustrating in that there are a few kind of crystal clear conclusions to draw from it. There are a few things it seems like we know. One is that doing ranked choice voting does seem to decrease negative campaigning. So, they've done some surveys of people and voters say they see fewer negative ads, less kind of fewer attacks. We actually saw this in San Francisco recently where, there were 3 candidates. 2 of them kind of formed an alliance and basically said explicitly, hey, if you're not voting for me, if you don't want to vote for me, vote for, we're each other's backups, right? At the same time, it's not clear that it increases turnout. In fact, there's some research to show it decreases turnout. And in particular, to the point Claire was making earlier, it decreases turnout among voters with less education and among non-white voters, which is super worrying, right? If you have all these divides in American politics along class lines, along lines of race, and to sort of add another one is worrying. Right. Again, that research, I think some people will probably argue with it, but it's at least tentatively true. So, it's
sometimes these things that are built in the lab in practice don't have the intended effects.
No, that's right. And look, the decrease in negative campaigning is a good thing, I guess. Is it a good thing?
Because you have people buddying up, and in general, it's just about getting
getting
more people on your side as opposed to the zero-sum game.
Right.
You make fun. Can I say something? You make fun of it, Nate. But also, why aren't we disturbed by the decline of civility?
Because I'm pro-swearing.
Well,
look, civility can mean a lot of things. It can sometimes mean broader democratic participation, which I think is a good thing, and you're allowed to root for as a journalist, right? But if civility means being deferential and polite to people in power, I mean, F that.
No, but you can be non-deferential and not call someone a corrupt crook. The thing about attack ads, obviously they work. We're all sitting here on a politics podcast. But if you look at them from, I don't know, a former debater's point of view, they're actually just sort of facile points that have nothing to do with the argument. And so you are actually lowering the level of discourse in a country.
Whatever extent we can prioritize honesty and get rid of civility, I'm a pro-honesty, anti-civility
But you can be
voter.
honest without being mean.
I mean, I'm not. Yeah, you can, right? But I'm just saying,
it's you can. I've never found that appealing personally, but
does the traditional way that we structure voting in this country, where it's a zero-sum game, incentivize hostility and incivility more than, say, ranked choice voting? And if so, and then I guess where on our priority list of ways we want to fix our politics is this notion of, well, we want it to be a sort of kinder space?
I think it's exceptionally low on the on the list of priorities. I mean, I suppose, no, it's probably true that, like, if a scorched earth campaign wouldn't work as well with ranked choice voting,
Correct.
right? But to me, that's not the reason why you do ranked choice voting, right? The reason is just that, like, people have preferences that go beyond just 1 or 0, and it kind of more broadly reflects the consensus about, like, kind of what the electorate wants.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
A personal question?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that fostering more moderate campaigns and appeals to the moderate center is good? Or do you think that, like, it's good to have partisan power because it, like, directs parties? Like, what's your opinion on, like, the actual, are these things healthy for democracy?
I mean, I think they're probably going to happen whether you like it or not. I can't think of very many electoral systems where you haven't had some type of parties emerging and people have limited information and parties help to organize those preferences. I mean, you know, look, I would like to, I suppose, have a system where parties are a bit more fluid. Maybe there are more than 2 viable parties. And that's one of the arguments for ranked choice voting, right? Is now if I want to vote for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein, but I also have a preference in the Clinton versus Trump debate, then I could say Gary Johnson's my first choice, Jill Stein's my second choice, and I don't know, Donald Trump is my third choice. And so if it comes down to it, I'd rather have Trump than Clinton, but I'd really rather have Gary Johnson. And so that would be an argument for ranked choice voting, I think.
Claire, you mentioned a minute ago that a number of states have experimented with this, and there's other different kinds of experiments with our democracy going on. I'm curious if the group feels like that's a good thing, that, you know, depending on where you live, you sort of elect your people in a different way, and we should have all these different models, or do we eventually need to get back to everyone votes the same way no matter what at every level of government?
Well, that's federalism right there, baby. Because states have the power to choose the way that they administer elections and the way that they vote, and that is something that elections officials on the state level hold extremely dear. And Democrat or Republican, you will generally find a dislike of, you know, let's say a national law saying this is how we vote now. But I do think that states also do cater to their particular electorates and the particular characters of their states. See Maine. Here's
the thing, though. So in the abstract, I agree with I don't think there's any particular reason you need the exact same voting structure in every state or in every city. And in the abstract, I like the idea of, like, municipalities and states experimenting with new and better ways to administer elections. What really worries me about it, though, is it takes the election itself, and we saw this in 2016 to an extent, and puts it into the partisan meat grinder. So in Maine, for example, you're seeing a debate over the validity and the legitimacy of this way of administering elections, and that debate is falling along, predictably, partisan lines. So you have Republican candidates in Maine who are saying, well, I might not accept the results here, right? Yeah. So it makes me really you saw something similar in California, by the way. So it makes me really nervous. This is why it was so troubling when Trump said he might not accept the results of the 2016 election. It makes me really nervous to sort of take the election itself, that's supposed to be like the venue for the debate, and make it part of the debate.
But that might just be because it's new, and I mean, this might just be growing pains or transition period. I mean, did they argue about how we decided to do elections back when they decided on 2 parties? Yes.
I think your point, Micah, right, is that it's happening in a particularly fraught political moment when people are more apt to cast sort of aspersions on the system and say this is all corrupt and it's all whatever, and, like, it does the work of delegitimizing our own institutions.
That makes me nervous. But I don't know. Maybe it would just be growing pains. But when I started researching ranked choice voting, I was like, oh, this sounds great. Just in the sense of, like, you're getting more information about voters and what they care about and who they want. Which I was thinking for us wouldn't ranked choice voting, like, be awesome for us
as data
journalists? Would we get that data?
Well, that's the thing that's a little weird about it. And I think this is probably the best, you know, I've heard some objections are like, oh, voters will find it confusing. I mean, screw you. If you're a political reporter and you want to say, let's not give the voters more power to make decisions. But I think there is a good argument that you guys were alluding to about the lack of transparency, right? where some state agency elections bureau says, okay, we've kind of crunched the numbers and gone through a complicated, not that complicated, but somewhat complicated formula. And it turns out that Susan Collins won, even though she didn't get the most first place votes or whatever. And you can't really check our work necessarily, right? Because it involves private ballots, or maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know.
Like JPEGs of thousands of documents.
I guess you could, right? You could show here is every ballot anonymized and their preferences, and kind of verify it that way. But it does reduce transparency a little bit.
The other thing is there's this question of what you do with. Okay, so let's say I'm filling out my ballot for who's the best person on this podcast, and instead of doing Micah, Claire, Jody, Nate, I just do Micah, Claire, right? But then the election goes 4 rounds, let's say. I think they call that like an exhausted ballot. And I think in some places, at least, my ballot wouldn't count once you get to the fourth round because I didn't fill it in all the way.
So then you're disenfranchising people.
Which you end up in this weird thing where someone went to the polls, they voted, but their vote doesn't count. To me, that's really troubling. I had a tough time finding like an estimate for how many of those votes there are, but it doesn't seem trivial. It's like...
Yeah. I mean, because also, just one little point is that during state and local elections, sometimes people just don't, there's no name recognition for some of the candidates. Right. So you might be like, I don't know, I don't want to vote for this person if I don't know who they are. So to me, that's like a pretty logical decision by a voter not to fill in the ballot in full.
And we've seen it in Maine and in California as well, that these kinds of systems lead to a lot more candidates, and so there's a lot more information you have to process before you go in, so that's something to keep our eye on. Okay, we will see how those results pan out, and maybe we'll talk about it some more.
I was just going to say the Oscars uses ranked choice voting. So.
Oh, and that's never controversial, and they always nail their results,
yeah, exactly,
right? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. All right, let's move on, and we're going to talk about Nevada very briefly, where incumbent Senator Dean Heller is up for re-election. But before we do that, this week's podcast is brought to you by Quip toothbrushes. I have some bad news. The truth is, most of us are brushing our teeth wrong. We're not doing it for long enough, and we're forgetting to change the brush on time. And that's because most brands focus on selling flashy gimmicks rather than better brushing, but not Quip. And here's what makes them different. For starters, Quip is an electric toothbrush that is a fraction of the cost of bulkier toothbrushes while still packing just the right amount of vibrations to help clean your teeth. Quip's built-in timer helps you clean for the dentist recommended 2 minutes with guiding pulses that remind you when it's time to switch sides. Just really walks you through it, and it pulses every time. Okay, switch from the left side, now go to the right side, now go to the top on the left, and so forth. Next, Quip subscription plans are for your health, not just for convenience. They deliver new brush heads on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Quip comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror and unsticks to use as a cover when you have to take it on the go. Everyone loves Quip. They are on Oprah's O List. They were named one of Time's best inventions, and it is the first subscription electric toothbrush accepted by the American Dental Association. Quip starts at just $25, and if you go to getquip.com/538, that's the numbers, getquip.com/538 right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. One more time, getquip, getquip.com/538, getquip.com/538. All right, we're back. A few minutes on the Nevada Senate race. Nate, how significant is this race? Go. That's the end of my question.
The general election race?
Sure. And then I guess how should we view the primary in that context?
I mean, I don't think there's any suspense about who the candidates are going to be. So the primary is not that interesting. But tune into 538's live blog tomorrow night.
Wait, we have a live blog?
Mm-hmm. The general election is, I mean, it's hard to say like any one state is the most important, but it's probably the closest thing to a must-win Republican pickup for Democrats, where Nevada is a fairly purple state, although it swings back and forth a little bit from election to election. Dean Heller has had a heck of a time figuring out how to position himself vis-a-vis Trump, but has not ultimately emerged as someone who is kind of never Trump or anti-Trump really. In Rosen, Democrats have a candidate who I think they're quite pleased with and who gave up actually kind of a swing seat to run for it, and so she's a pretty well qualified nominee, assuming she's a nominee, which she almost certainly will be. And so, yeah, I mean, this is like one of the foremost battlegrounds in the Senate. I mean, and if Democrats don't win there, that and Arizona are the two easier pickup opportunities, then their chances of winning the Senate would be remote.
But is it like if Democrats, if Rosen doesn't win, does that like totally foreclose Democrats winning the Senate, or is it like
kind of right? If you're going off the easy baskets theme, and if they don't win Nevada and Arizona, then they have to like.
Is there a world where they lose Nevada, but then win Tennessee instead and defend Claire McCaskill's seat and Joe Manchin's seat and all the others? I mean, I guess, right? But this isn't that. It's not like Dean Heller is Joe Manchin or someone who is like uniquely popular in his home state.
No, he's
right?
not that popular.
I mean, he started out somewhat popular, but he, like, frankly, most Republicans in a Hillary Clinton voting state probably would be in the Trump era, has gotten himself into a lot of trouble and has erred too far in all sorts of different directions, right? And so it's kind of like, doesn't mean he's like super easy to knock off, and Nevada's a little weird as a state, but like, if Democrats can't win there, then like winning Tennessee and running the table anywhere else is pretty difficult.
No, I agree with that. There's the question of if Democrats aren't winning in Nevada in the sense that the country moves together for the most part, then it's very unlikely they're winning in a state like Tennessee or Texas. Take out that part of it, just they need X number of seats. On that alone, Nate, how important is Nevada? You get what I mean? Forget the fact that state moves together. Let's say every Senate race was independent. Wouldn't Nevada still be really important just because they don't have that many pickup opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, it's, there are a tier of like 5 or 6 races that are probably equally important. I'm not quite sure how you'd rank them in terms of importance, but like...
Let's try to rank them.
Voting.
Yeah, rank them.
I mean, which state's close to the tipping... Like, I would argue that... So we would say which state is close to the tipping point.
Right.
I'd argue that Nevada is actually not as close to the tipping point because it should be a comparatively underscore easy pickup opportunity for Democrats. It's kind of what I'm saying, right? So that's why I'm like, it's like, that's why I put it more in the must-win category, which of course also by definition is very important. I mean, I think Democrats should be in a environment where the generic ballot favors them by 7 or 8 points, which is back at where their lead is now, right? And Nevada is a Hillary Clinton state, although not by that much. But, like, I think they should be slight favorites there against a non-super popular incumbent, and Heller is not super popular. And, again, if they can't win that, then that either means that, like, the national environment wasn't as favorable as they thought, or, like, I don't know, right?
Or maybe something went wrong with Rosen, or...
Maybe, but she's a vetted candidate who has won in a swing district before.
Who's raising a lot of money.
She's outraised Heller.
Yeah. I mean, what do the polls say?
Polls have it like tied at 39 about, with like about a fifth of the electorate undecided.
And I mean, I think people have raised the notion that she doesn't have name recognition.
That poll from the Nevada Independent found her with like way less name recognition than Heller.
I mean, some of these polls, half these polls are from Public Policy Polling, not our favorite pollster, and they're done on behalf of partisan groups. I mean, it looks like Rosen is the slightest bit ahead.
I don't look at those internal polls, actually, Nate. They're not very reliable.
But the SurveyMonkey / Axios poll had...
Wait, where's that?
Rosen up... Go to Wikipedia, man. Had Rosen up 6. The Melman Group poll had
it tied.
Had Heller up 1. I don't know. I think she's up like 2 or 3 points. There aren't a lot of polls.
Right.
I mean, is Heller a Republican senator from a blue state, or is this a really purplish state? Just in general, what shade is Nevada in your head?
Nevada is part of the back in the 2016 election when Clinton's campaign controversially decided to sort of run the table and juice up their field volunteers and their work in the Southwest. Nevada was one of those states, and so I think they see a lot of promise in maybe like second generation younger minority communities, but also just the idea that maybe there are some of those suburban college educated Republicans that you can win. But I think the big thing is about the diversity of these like younger trying to get enthused voters. But I think that there's a little bit of a problem there in a midterm year, right? Where it's like,
with turnout. So I think it is still in a midterm year, probably more reddish than blue. No, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Nevada, to me, I think of it as sort of the mirror opposite of Arizona, where Arizona is sort of just to the right of the national average, and Nevada is just to the left. The thing that's weird is I think Clinton actually underperformed in Nevada relative to Obama, while she overperformed in Arizona, right?
I mean, Nevada is a weird state. I mean, I was just in Las
Oh,
Vegas.
so you know everything about Nevada now.
No, but in some ways,
Almost everyone lives in Las Vegas in Nevada.
In some ways, Nevada, it really is an intersection of red America and blue America, where it's becoming quite ethnically diverse on the one hand. On the other hand, the white population there is like not particularly
less educated than
not
the
particularly
national
strongly
average.
educated. They're not elites, right? And et cetera, et
Lower
cetera.
income, yeah.
Lower income. Industries that are vulnerable to disruption of various kinds, and so it is an interesting mix of different types of things. I actually sort of agree with Claire too that like Nevada has one of the lowest turnout rates in the country, and so in general that might be a state where in a traditional midterm election, Hispanic voters and Asian voters are less likely to turn out. For example, Mike is grimacing.
Why do you disagree with that?
I don't know. Now I'm questioning myself, but what?
You disagreed with my point because you thought I was giving too much credence to like college-educated voters, probably. But I think my diversity point is right, where it's like younger, second generation.
No, I agree.
Like newly registered people. I'm trying to think of like where are the margins for Democrats, where they say like, oh, how do we kind of like swing it into a blue state? And you need the diversity component, but also you probably need to, I don't know, how many like big suburbs with post 2008 housing crash are there left in Nevada?
No,
not a lot.
But I guess I thought, look, going into 2016, I thought of Nevada as a blue state, and I kind of thought people are kidding themselves if they think this is like a true swing state. If Trump wins it, it'll be because he's winning comfortably nationally, right? And Clinton won there by 2, despite the fact that Nevada demographically, at least half of Nevada, is like well suited to Trump in the lower income, less education. Those are Trump voters, right? But maybe I'm wrong in thinking of. I don't think it's like a blue state, but all else being equal, I think it's more blue than red. But your point is not in a midterm year. Okay.
No, yeah, my point is like in a midterm year like this, it's more purple.
We'll end on that note, but Micah, you want to tell our listeners again, and I guess Claire, that we are live blogging tomorrow. Is that right?
No, we're doing because there are so many primaries.
Yeah.
What I'm going to try is sort of a small, more intimate live blog.
That's why I was confused. I'm not live blogging tomorrow.
Claire's not live blogging tomorrow, but we'll kind of swap up who does it.
Like a soiree
each Tuesday, but it'll be
like a mixer.
So Nate will do it tomorrow. It'll be a small group, just like chatting about election results. We'll start about 7.
Are people going to get like a paperless post invite, or or you just come to the site?
You could come to the site, but watch out for an invitation. I'll send out some VIP invitations.
Starting at 7
at about
p.m.
7, yeah,
Eastern. And we'll be live blogging, so come join us on the site. All right.
If you get an invite.
Before we go, one quick piece of housekeeping. So you may have noticed, listeners, that there have been more and more segments coming in this feed later on in the week, not just emergency podcasts, but bonus conversations as well. And that is not an accident. Throughout the year, we're going to look for more ways to have some of those extra conversations, and Galen Druk is going to be taking the lead on a lot of those. So on Mondays, you will get this crew, and then at other points in the week, you will be in Galen's trusty hands. And we're also going to be doing more original reporting, more midterm forecast stuff as that starts to get built, of course. So there's lots of good stuff on the horizon, and at some point the old music will come back. But keep complaining to me on Twitter about that.
More Galen is always a good thing.
Indeed. Okay. Thanks to our crew. Nate Silver, thank you.
Thank you.
Claire Malone, thanks.
Thank you.
Micah Cohen, thanks to you.
Thank you.
My name is Jody Avirgan. If you live in New York City, we've got a 30 for 30 podcast event on Wednesday night. Come say hi. You can find information on Twitter or just email me for the details. Galen Druk, whose ears are burning, is our producer. Tony Chow is in the control room. You can get in touch by emailing us, podcasts at 538.com, or tweet us with questions or comments, or plead for an invite to the special live blog tomorrow night. You can tweet at 538politics. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a rating or a review in the Apple Podcast Store. When you leave a rating, it helps our rankings, which helps others discover the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
But in my wildest high school dreams, I dreamed of marrying a Lugnut millionaire
Yeah.
with a house on Lake Erie.
There's a minor league baseball team, right? The Lugnuts.
The Lugnuts.
They're a great logo.
The
Great
freaking
logo.
Lansing Lugnuts. They're my local team.
Oh, really? Lansing?
Is that actually a team name?
The Lansing Lugnuts. Yes.
A great logo. It's like an animated lug nut with like little googly eyes.